I think it gets me thinking about this idea that I often think about too, about where life is. Like, does life take place within us, or does it take place outside of us? Because as a poet, you talk about emotions, we talk about all these things, we write about all these beautiful things. That's an eternal world, but that internal can only happen because of the external world that we live in. So the question I have for you is, does life take place inside of us, or does it take place outside of us?
Is it a cop out to say both?
You can say both, but you have to give twice the explanation.
Starting with the inner world, I think a big part of life happens inside us because how you perceive things often can influence your experience of life. The external part of life, I think, is so important too, because how you interact with your environment, how you interact with the people around you, like how you interact with nature, even, like all of that kind of stuff. Like you said, it's sort of a two-way thing. Like, you respond to what's external to you, but what's external to you evokes an internal response. So I think what's happening inside and what's happening outside happens in tandem. Like, I think that they both together make up the experience of life. So life happens on different planes, almost, like the physical, the internal, or in the mind, and also the spiritual too. They all intersect to, yeah. Take place.
Yes, the role, the play that we have of life.
Yeah.
I think the reason that question is always fascinating me, because it's like, where do you start if you want to change your life, right? Do you start internally? Do you just, say, I'm only going to care about what happens inside of me, not people outside. All of you can wait. It's all about how I feel inside. I'm going to fix that. Or do you stop thinking about yourself and you actually talk to people, go outside, start being in nature, start doing things outside of yourself? I think the answer is, you're right, it's kind of both. But I think it's questions that, where do you start? Where would you start if you had to put it back together?
Where would I start? I think mindset is really important. I think it shapes the way that you choose to move through life. I think it shapes the way that you perceive things and the choices that you make, and whether you do or do not do something, whether that's for fear or, that kind of thing. So honestly, I would start within, because I think that will. There's a phrase, do you know where I heard it from? I think it's in a song. But look,
What song it is, right? Depends who's singing.
If you can get your mind out, you can get your body out.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
And so when you asked me that question, that is what came to my mind. And so I think it's truth, or at least sometimes true. If you can get your mind out, then your body will follow, and your body being your environment.
Okay. Now I want to shift into, you're talking about the internal world. I want to shift into the internal world of poets. Now, I think you mentioned before, poets have all these different emotions that we go through, and we try to express them in different ways. But each emotion plays a different role in our poetry. You mentioned uncertainty and fear play a big role in our poetry, in the current writing. But talk to me also about the role of anxiety, but also, you could even put them all under an umbrella. So anxiety, fear, uncertainty, these dark aspects of our emotions. What role have they played in your poetry? And a tag-on question to that is that, can we only create from these negative emotions? Is it these negative emotions that fuel our creativity, or have you found that positive emotions can also create just as good?
It's a good question. For me, the emotions like uncertainty and fear, they play a role in my poetry, in that I often use poetry as a way to process things. And so it's quite a cathartic process, actually. And it helps me to have perspective, kind of what I said before, as to why I used to make the video recordings when I was younger. It kind of gives me perspective as to what's going on in my mind. So, yeah, uncertainty and fear, like they do feature in my poetry, but it's mostly as sort of a way of expressing the emotions to process them. My friend said to me, she was like, you write when you're emotionally charged. And I think that's true for any emotion, though. Whether it's like fear, uncertainty, anger, happiness, joy, like that sort of thing. Love. Okay, this romantic in you. Can't forget about love. But yeah, like I think it's true with any emotion. Anything that gives you inspiration.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to be writing from a place of negativity. I think you can be writing from a place of the most intense elation, or you could even just be writing, maybe you're not really feeling like super emotionally charged. Maybe you're like, that's a really pretty flower. I want to write about how pretty I think it is. It's just like, I don't think that I don't think it's restricted to feeling a certain way. I think it's more about, are you inspired? In whatever in whatever you're feeling, are you inspired? So yeah, I don't think it has to be tied to a certain emotion. For me, a lot of the time it is.
It is, yeah, same. Oh, actually, I had a question. You mentioned inspiration. How do you foster inspiration within yourself? Like, maybe we can't always be inspired, but when you feel that, what do you do to bring that spark back again?
To be honest, like, I did go through quite a long period of time a few months ago where I was like, I have zero inspiration or motivation to write. It was just like, where is it gone? So I did go through a period like that, and I took a step back from writing because I was just like, I have nothing to say. I have nothing to write about. I think I needed that time away, but I would say my biggest inspiration and where I keep coming back to is nature. I think that in nature there are so many truths, and even in just like the process of I appreciate that. Thank you. No, I think at nature there are so many truths, and even just like the process of, I don't know, metamorphosis, like that process of transformation. Just you could overlay so many truths that we experience in our own lives on just that process alone. I say just that process alone, it's a pretty cool process, but you know what I mean. And there are so many examples of things that happen in nature where you can do that. So even just like just walking around in nature and letting myself be open to the thoughts that will come in my head or what it could mean, I think it's a huge inspiration for me because it helps me also to contextualize some things in my life. How would you answer that question?
Fascinating question. I think so. I had a word to start when you were speaking about how, like, I relate to what you're saying about emotions being like the catalyst for writing. I think it's so true. I can almost write when I feel something intense. I can only write when I feel intense emotion, but other side, I feel a lot of intense emotions a lot of the time. So it's like, it is helpful. But the way I try to inspire myself when I feel uninspired is to see other people doing really, really, really cool stuff. So that always helps. When I see someone doing really some that poetry event, or if it's anything else, if I see them doing it and I can I think how my mind works is that it takes meaning from stuff.
Yeah.
So if I see someone do some really cool stuff, I'll interpret it a different way. I'll be like, "Whoa, that's really cool. It got me thinking about this." And then I think that always is the case for me. It's just that sometimes I block myself from the second thing that I have to do after that, which is pick up and write, which is see what comes off that inspiration, you know. And so it's about learning to do that more, learning to give a little more space between having an idea and being confident or comfortable. It's either like, I'm just gonna just see what happens if I take this silly idea and build it out, you know.
Yeah.
And so like a lot of time it's that process of like inspiration is like me watching someone do something cool, like reading your book, it's like, oh my God, that's incredible. Like, like I was reading your book this whole week, and that from that came that poem that I showed you, because I was like, this is incredible. Like, it's going to be making me think about myself, make me think about my emotions, make me think about how I feel. And then from that, I said, okay, now I'm in a point, but like I need to foster the process even more and see if I can write. But you mentioned also nature. Nature is a great way. I think I love nature. I think, funnily enough, I go to nature to chill, to like not write, but end up writing. So it's like I have like day I'm like, I'm just here.
Can't get away from
that. I'm here to just relax. Oh, that's a nice tree. And it's like when we start writing about whatever the emotions,
I do completely agree with you though about being inspired by what others do. I think that's actually quite a big thing for me as well. Sometimes it's nice to go to poetry events and just listen and not perform and just like take it all in and marvel.
Because when you're not performing, you're not nervous. You're not like, oh my God, what am I going to say? You're just there like, oh, this is amazing.
It's just so inspiring. So no, I do agree with that. The poem you wrote was beautiful, by the way. So
Thank you. Again, it was inspired by yours. But you mentioned something I wanted to touch on too about truth and nature. I think, how do I phrase this question? Okay, so here we go. So nature and truth, I think, is completely true. I think the
is it?
The relationship between those two things, I think, is so interlinked. I think we are part of nature. That's why we can see that. I think a lot also it comes from our ability to recognize patterns, right? We can recognize the pattern of nature because we build through it ourselves. We can see it in us. We go, oh, that's interesting. That metamorphosis kind of reminds me of my internal state. And even though the metamorphosis is external, and that's actually the being of the butterfly, we can somehow, what's the opposite of anthropomorphism? I don't know. But, you can do that and then take that emotion and, and internalize it yourself. I think also from that question, I also had a question about poetry, its role in that. Is that a mediator between that for you? Do you think that we use poetry as a way, just like how you're talking about the metamorphosis of like seeing truth in other things? Do you think we use poetry as a way to see truths in other things that happen in life? Whether it goes something we've been through, we can find the words for it. We go, oh my God, this is true. I know this is true because I felt it and I was able to express it. Or, we can see something external from us and go, that's definitely true because I wrote about it and it sounded very true. What do you think about that?
That's such a good question.